Hangout from wherever you are tuning in around the world. I'm Paddy, and I'm here from Dublin. Our first Hangout earlier in the week was with three young entrepreneurs, founders of companies who have been part of the Web Summit in years past. So we're joined this evening by three fantastic journalists from around the world. They write for a variety of online publications and offline publications as well. So I thought I might just go around the Hangout and ask each of them to introduce themselves, starting with Ben Rooney.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are in the world. Ben Rooney, I am the technology editor for the Wall Street Journal in Europe. We'll be at the whole of the Web Summit, and very much looking forward to seeing some exciting, new, innovative, non-cloney type startups that are going to do some, doing cool stuff that actually matters.
Fantastic, you're very welcome. Martin Bryant, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, so I'm editor-in-chief at The Next Web, and yes, very much looking forward to the Web Summit. It's one of my favourite conferences in Europe in terms of meeting people. It's one of those ones where you can kind of say, are you at the Web Summit? And yes, you know that there are going to be people there to meet, and really interesting people, old, familiar faces, and new people as well, so it's always a pleasure.
And Martin, I'd imagine almost everybody in the Hangout knows The Next Web. You might just give people just a quick reminder of the sheer size of the Next Web.
Yeah, sure. So we are kind of one of the big tech blogs. We cover everything from kind of Google and Facebook down to smallest new startups. It's always a joy, really, to stumble upon a team somewhere completely unexpected that turns out to be really amazing. Whether that's kind of in an email or a shake of a hand at a conference or wherever it is. And yeah, so we are kind of worldwide. We have staff everywhere from San Francisco through to Thailand and Singapore, and kind of lots of places in between. And we really love that global focus rather than just the US or just Europe. We very much like to look at as much of the world as possible.
Fantastic. Ben Rooney, everybody knows the Wall Street Journal, but Ben Parr, welcome back. I know you dropped off for a minute. You're joining us from the United States. I'd love a short introduction.
So a little bit about me. I made my name and reputation as a journalist. I used to be the editor, the co-editor of Mashable, the technology news site, which built out of Scotland, and ran that for 3.5 years. I ran West Coast operations, wrote 2,400 articles. Now I'm investing under my own fund called Dominate Fund. We have 6 partners investing $25 million across technology industries, and the thing that we do for startups actually is we help accelerate their growth through our experience in how to work with celebrities, press, marketing, customer and user acquisition, all these kind of areas. And I'm here more to talk about how do you get the attention of somebody from the press or somebody or an investor. How do you stand out if, say, you've never done this before?
Fantastic, great. Well, you're all very welcome. Ben Rooney, I thought I might just come back to you with a very fundamental and basic question. What is it that journalists are looking for, in particular when they fly in from all over the world to the Web Summit in October? And there's going to be 400 or so of them crawling around the place, walking around the place. At the core, what are you guys looking for?
Simple thing. You're looking for stories. You're looking for something that is new, something that is going to grab people's attention, something that is going to be slightly different. You're not. What we're not interested in is, I'm a startup and I'm going to be the biggest Groupon clone in Dortmund, or we are, I don't know, Fab meets Skype, and we're setting up, and we're going to be the 3rd largest of these in Belarus. If you want a global audience to read about what it is that you're doing, then you've got to be merititious of that. You've got to be a company that's doing something that's exciting and new and is really going to be set the place on fire. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was in Barcelona very recently, and it's a slightly weird example, I have to say, but there was a startup I saw there, slightly strange, and they managed to, it's a startup that's doing 3D printing of food. And if you really want to get, they really got my attention, was that they managed to print my face in tomato ketchup. So that was a good way of grabbing my attention.
So it's very much about grabbing attention. Martin, what about you? How do people kind of pique or draw your attention, and what kind of pitfalls do they tend to make?
Yeah, I mean, I agree a lot, with a lot of what Ben Rooney was just saying there. What I'd add to it as well is that it's very important to pick the right journalist for the right time of your evolution. For example, I'm sure that the Wall Street Journal, for example, will be very interested in companies with huge potential to kind of make a big impact on the markets, IPO, that kind of thing. Whereas we're very interested at a very early stage. I mean, want to speak to startups of all stages, but it can be even just the seed of an idea. And I just love meeting people who have, they've just got their first app. It may not even be in the App Store. It's just a beta, and they want people to try it out, or indeed a beta for the Americans. And people always wonder what I'm saying when I say beta. Sorry about that. But so we just love trying out those early stage things and being one of the first, really, or ideally the first, to write about these new ideas, something really different, something that really does have the potential to make an impact. But at the same time, it could just be a really interesting idea, something that no one's ever done before. That's a spark of an idea. That's what I'm looking for.
Great. And Ben Parr, if somebody is to, how does somebody actually get your attention? I mean, should you send people, a long email? Should you hand them a press release? How do you build a relationship? Fortunately, I think, Martin, I'm going to put that, or Ben Rooney, I'm going to put that question to you, actually.
All right. How do you build a relationship? Conferences is a great way of doing it. A conference like like yours is a fantastic way to establish a personal relationship, because there's actually nothing quite like actually meeting the person face to face, having a chat, allowing them to discuss it. Even if at that stage it may be that it's too early. It may be that you don't write about them simply because they're not really ready. But there is nothing like a sort of personal introduction. If you can't do that, if you can't do it physically, I find Twitter a pretty good way of doing it. You talk to 10 journalists and you'll get 11 opinions on what is the best way of reaching them. I find Twitter is a particularly good one. I find email is almost useless. I couldn't actually tell you how many unread emails there are in my inbox at the moment. But at the conference, look, just come up and say hello. I mean, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to pick some really embarrassing moment, and it's going to be awkward for us all. But we don't fight. I mean, I don't know, maybe some do, but so just don't be afraid. Is the simple answer.
Ben Parr, imagine I'm a first-time entrepreneur. I'm launching my product at the Web Summit. I'm here with my co-founder, and I arrive in Dublin on the Tuesday late afternoon, and I want to build a relationship with you or a number of other journalists. How do I stand out in your view?
The most important simple thing is to go meet people. Just go find them. Go talk to them. Make a very, very quick pitch about what you do. Talk about mutual friends or mutual acquaintances or your investors or whatever else that might be that might validate that you're not crazy, and go from there.
Okay, Martin, are there any, in your experiences, what are the big no-nos when startups approach you? Suddenly you get a kind of shiver down the back of your spine, and you're like, oh no, this is bad. I got to get out of this.
The only one really is the kind of overly reverential approach, where it's kind of like obviously going through their mind is I'm going to be really polite and really flattering to the journalist, but it ends up being more kind of creepy and a bit kind of uncomfortable, where it's overwhelming kind of praise, and you know, I'm just a person just doing my job, and you're just a person doing your job. Let's just talk. You know, we're all people, and you know, it's all about just personal relationships. And what I really like is meeting someone and then not writing about them for like 6 months, and then I'll see them at another conference and hear what they're up to then, and then I'll see them 2 months later and they'll say, oh, we're nearly ready, and then, you know, then it's time to write about them, and then they've got something ready. But over the time, I've learned to look for their emails. I recognize their name. A top tip actually for the second meeting, because I do meet a lot of people kind of second, third time at conferences. When you come up to me, if you've met me before, or this is the same for any journalist really, shake my hand, say, hi, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so startup. Because even if I do remember you, that's fine, but most of the time I don't, and I'm looking down at the name badge, and invariably the name badge is turned round, and so I can't see what they're called, and so I'm just trying to think of some way, what's happening with your startup, without trying to general questions, hoping they'll throw me a bone as to what it is they do, even though I recognize their face.
No, Martin, I think you just have to be a lot more blunt with this, which is like, I'm sure we've met, but I don't actually have a clue who you are. But I think that's a really good point, and there's a very good list of Colette Ballou from Ballou PR wrote a very good guest post on TechCrunch a while back, and she gave like 9 or 10 tips on, you know, things to do when you meet a journalist. And I think the top one was, like you were alluding to, which is don't be creepy. Really basic things like have a business card. I mean, I realize that the business card is the stupidest piece of technology that essentially hasn't changed in, you know, I don't know, 200 years or whatever it is. But actually, you know, they are still of some use and some merit. So I would certainly say have one of those. And I 100% agree with your thing about don't do that awful kind of hi, you know, like you're my long lost, you know, twin brother or something. You know, we're not being rude, and we're not being self-aggrandizing, but, you know, in this job you do meet a lot of people.
A very interesting point that Martin raised was that he seldom writes about someone just after meeting him, that many times it's 6 months afterwards, where, Martin, you've tracked the kind of this startup's kind of progression over time, that you feel now we've built up a rapport, I understand what you were doing, you know, I'm going to write something about you guys.
It varies. It depends on the stage that the company is at, but oftentimes it is they introduce themselves at a very early stage, and that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, Ben Parr, is that similar for you? Do you track startups? I think Ben Parr is frozen. Blessed American broadband.
Yeah.
Ben Rooney, just on tracking, how often is it on the second, the third, or the fourth occasion of meeting somebody do you tend to? Is that a more prevalent pattern to writing about somebody? It's not.
Yeah, it certainly can be. I mean, there are times when, you know, as Martin was saying, you'll meet someone, their product's not right, it's far too early. As a rule, rule more, or as a guideline more than a rule, I tend to wait until a company's established some sort of traction, unless it's a really, really amazing idea, before we'll write about them. But that certainly doesn't mean that we shouldn't be, you know, having the chat, having the conversation. I can think of several companies that, you know, we were talking to long before they became big. And then suddenly, if you're not careful, you know, you miss the opportunity and they're gone. But I think it's always worth establishing a personal connection, and most journalists will meet. You know, I say most of the journalists I know are very happy to meet pretty well anyone, but there has to be an expectation on both sides, which is just because I'm meeting you, you know, that doesn't mean you're going to get 600 words in the Wall Street Journal and your picture. It may well mean that you don't get anything at all, but as Martin says, maybe, you know, 3 months later, bingo, suddenly it's your time.
Ben Parr?
And think about the right people to meet. Some journalists don't cover your industry. Some editors-in-chiefs are much tougher to get a story out of than regular reporters. Editors-in-chiefs are far more busy. So figure out, like, what are the right reporters at the right publications.
So you're advising before people arrive at a conference, they should really do their research. They should, you know, follow the stories of journalists, understand what they like and do write about. Thanks, Ben Parr. So we have a question from Dennis Duvachel, just on the Google Hangout. So, okay, we've met for a few seconds at the conference. What is the next step to keeping the relationship alive, I presume, over time, since email is more or less useless? Martin?
Well, I think it depends. Email for me isn't useless. Even though I get thousands of emails a day, I still try and pick out all the important ones. So I still recommend people email me. I mean, it varies from person to person. And yeah, I think that email is definitely on the way out. As and the problem is there isn't really a replacement for it. Ben Rooney mentioned Twitter. I don't like Twitter pitches and that kind of thing because they disappear off my mention stream too quickly for me to an hour later when I think, oh, look at that, it's had a few more or whatever. So it's hard to keep up with those. So for me, it's still email, still kind of even if it's just keeping up with the latest. We've just launched in beta. We've just added a new feature. Whenever there's a milestone or something that's happened, let me know. And also, I still recommend coming to as many conferences as you can where you'll see tech journalists, because then you build up that rapport, that face-to-face recognition that really does help in the future.
I'll just pick up on that one. I'd be careful on that one. Attending too many conferences. If I start seeing the same CEOs at conference after conference after conference, and then I'm thinking, well, why aren't you running your business? Your business is not to appear at conferences. Your business is to run your business. And there's this funny thing. It's always like when chasing after. It's always the ones you really want to talk to are the people who never respond to your emails. They're the people that you're really keen on getting hold of. The other thing, the answer to that, I'll give an example of a startup. I was in Berlin, and this guy who discovered that I was in Berlin, and he basically hassled the crap out of me pretty much the entire time I was there. And to begin with, it was slightly annoying. And then I just thought, no, this guy is really, really desperate to meet, and you have to reward that kind of. Someone is that persistent, then clearly they've got something to tell. So I had 20 minutes between literally checking out and getting in the cab to go to the airport. So we sat down, had 20 minutes. It was a fantastic story. I ended up doing a piece on it. It ended up getting picked up in New York. We did a video, I think, and certainly a podcast on it. He got tremendous exposure out of it. So I think the answer is the worst that's going to happen, the worst thing that is going to happen with the journalists is they're going to say no. Or, in fact, the worst thing is they're going to ignore you. And if that's as bad as it gets, you have nothing to lose.
So always ask. I have another question from Roger Plains in the Hangouts. So I'll just ask each of you quickly, starting with Martin, then Ben Rooney, then Ben Parr. You can just all give me your answers. So if a startup comes up to you, do you prefer a pitch or a quick demo on the spot? Martin?
It really depends on the startup and what the product is, but generally a quick demo is more memorable, definitely.
Right. Okay, now just to really confuse everything, I'm going to say chances are at that stage a pitch is better than a demo, because the demo is going to take too long and it's going to be awkward, and then where is everything? It depends where I am, and it's going to take up too much time. So I actually prefer a pitch. The number one question that I will always ask a startup is what problem are you solving? And if you can't answer that question in 15 seconds, or you have some unbelievably long and complicated answer, then that's not a good sign. So my number one tip: know the answer to that question and be able and have that honed.
Ben Parr?
Give a one-sentence pitch, and if you can do a demo really short, less than a minute, then do that. If you can't do it in less than a minute, you can't do it right on your phone, then don't do it. You can send a demo to us later to take a look at.
Okay, another question coming. Thanks a million, guys. Another question coming from Sachin Dev Dugal in the Hangout again is essentially, if you're launching your product at a conference, do you think there are a different set of rules to maybe a company that's already up and running? open to the three of you for somebody to jump in. Martin?
Well, I think if you're launching at a conference, what the problem is that so many people launch at conferences that you really have to get in to the journalists about, maybe 3 or 4, 5 days beforehand to get their attention and get them to know that you're launching there. Because otherwise, at the actual conference, if I get an email or a pitch, oh, we're launching today, well, I'm walking around a conference, I can't very well write about it probably for another few days necessarily. There's travel involved, so chances are I probably won't be able to write about you right away. So definitely best getting ahead of the crowd and getting out there with probably what would work best for you would be an embargoed release for a certain time. We're launching at the conference at this time, I wouldn't rely on trying to get all your press at the actual conference.
So Martin, does this mean that, in the 2, 3, 4 days before the conference, you're beginning to plan out from almost an editorial point of view, I guess, what stories you're probably going to publish whilst at the conference? Is that right? For
some of them, for the launches generally, that's the ideal situation. And then obviously at the conference itself, different things happen. There are things on stage that might happen. You might see something interesting that you want to write a quick piece about off the cuff. But in terms of launches, the best way to kind of increase your chance of coverage is to get in advance.
Now, Ben Rooney, if anything we've learned from this kind of hangout that, all journalists aren't exactly the same, and you're also writing for a hugely influential global print publication, so perhaps the rules are kind of slightly different for you, and you have a different approach to these things.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say something that's not going to make you very happy, Paddy, which is my advice is I wouldn't dream of launching at a conference, because if you launch at a conference, I don't know how many product launches there are going to be at Web Summit, but, if there's 20 of them, then you're just one voice in 20, and you're going to be deluged, and you are going to have to fight so hard to capture anyone's attention. There is a reason why Apple doesn't launch its products, at CES or at these kind of massive trade shows. Is simply they get swamped. So if you have decided that you are going to launch at the Web Summit, then I think Martin's advice is very good, which is, if I haven't said, make sure that we know about it in advance, because frankly, your chances of getting coverage on the day, if nobody knows anything about you in advance, are effectively zero.
Yeah, I would. I think there's a lot of sense in that.
Slim.
I'll come to you in a moment.
Conferences are not a good place to get coverage.
Are you still there, Ben? So I think there's a huge amount of sense in what.
Yeah, I'm here. Conferences are not the best place to do that.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Ben?
Well, if you can hear me, yeah, just that conferences are about networking, about meeting people, about relationships, not about really getting your product launched in front of lots of people. You meet lots of people at a conference, and then you can leverage those relationships for launches and for the other things you need later. The only other thing to remember is that #1 job is to build a great product. If you build a great product and it gets traction, we're going to call you. You're not going to be calling us.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, having been to so many conferences and been involved, obviously, in conferences as well, that I think for, if there are a lot of startups launching, it's a huge amount of noise, and one startup can break through and benefit immensely from so many journalists being in one place, but that may be only one startup out of quite a number of startups. So last year, Smart Things might have done incredibly well out of the event, but a lot of other startups that didn't kind of hook people or shine at the event, they were kind of crowded out by a small number of startups. And I'd also say that sometimes it's very difficult to compete if journalists are tipped off that Dropbox, for example, are making a significant announcement or launching a new feature. It's quite difficult to compete with a much bigger fish at a conference. So I'm just going to go back to the Hangout to look for one or two other questions, because there's quite a few questions about launching. Somebody's asking about LinkedIn. I don't think this is the place. What about print material? Do you think startups should circulate print material?
I just lose it. It gets thrown away or lost before I've got home usually. No, electronic stuff is much better. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, last thing I want. No, and I mean that's a time when, you know, having said email is pretty awful. That is a time when email does have its use, because if you know that you're expecting something, then that's fine. You can look for it. But no, what am I going to do with it? Like a piece of paper or, you know, a photograph? I mean, hopeless. I mean, you know, a memory stick perhaps. I don't know. I mean, no, email for something like that. Or you know, one bit of advice I would give to startups is make it easy for us to do our job. So if we are going to write about you, you know, there's a good chance we're going to need a piece of art to go with the story, an image of some description. Well, you know, if you've got a good piece of art, just put it on your site. Have a press section. Have, you know, something downloads. I mean, it's 20 minutes worse, not even that. But it just makes our life a lot easier. Basic fact sheets that you can put on your site, you know, so I'm not having to chase you like, when was the company founded, you know, who are your investors, all this sort of stuff. Really, really basic stuff. Just have that somewhere on your site, you know, in a press section that we can go straight to, and then we're going to save a whole lot of time.
So I have we've kind of said that we'd wrap it up by 5:30. So I'm just going to take a last question from Janica Nyman before maybe asking for a final word from each of you. So how do you guys feel about covering stories that have already been released by other media in the form of exclusives? Or also, do you feel that exclusives are the way to go, or should you just let every journalist know about what you're launching, or your new product, or your fundraising round, or whatever?
I'll pick that one up first. You've got to think, you've got to be quite thinking about your media strategy, and you've got to know and understand what the difference is between different titles, who their audience is, and what they're going to, you know, and what they want from it. Obviously, every journalist wants every story exclusively, and they don't want it, you know, and there is nothing worse for journalists than having to do follows. So, you know, here is this story that somebody else has got, and then you're playing catch up behind it, and you know that completely sucks, and we hate it. But my advice on to a startup is think very carefully about who you want to reach. You know, who and then look very closely at the titles you're talking to, and you know, which is the one that's going to get you the exposure that you want. Be aware of the fact that if you give an exclusive to one title, you are going to piss off everybody else. And then when you come along later, you know, you may find that conversation rather harder. If you're Apple, you know, it's frankly like no one gets a choice. But if you're a startup, you don't want to be making enemies right at the start of your career, or not necessarily enemies. That's too strong a word. But you don't want to be just putting people's noses out of joint. So my advice would be think very carefully about who you want to reach. You know, do your research and then give it to me.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to presume that the other both Ben and Martin, you know, obviously you favor exclusives, and you think that's a reasonable strategy.
To be honest, having experienced years of this now, and seen how different startups operate and use their kind of press strategy, I'd say that exclusives have their place. Generally, you probably want to offer your exclusive if it's just something small but interesting that you just want to kind of help build a relationship with a particular media outlet. And you know, it's something that the other outlets probably won't be too bothered about not having, but it's something interesting enough that the person you're giving the exclusive to will want to cover it. When it comes to your big, you know, you're just launching your Android app, you're releasing version 2.0 of your product or whatever, something really big that people that you really want to make a big splash with. Exclusives are a bad idea, because then if you go to everyone else 5 minutes, or no, worse, the minute it goes out on the site you've sent the exclusive to, you send it to everyone else, you're going to get very little coverage, because people are like, well, that's a kick in the teeth, isn't it?
So put an embargo on it instead. Is that the kind of?
Yeah, for a big release, an embargo is generally a better idea. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'd be careful on embargoes. I mean, first of all,
Agreed.
not everybody is scrupulous about keeping their embargoes. And secondly, if you start over-embargoing things, you know, it's all going to get a little tedious, and it's an abuse. You're attempting to control what somebody else is doing, and unless you've got a very good reason to do that, and your embargo is justified, you may find that will count against you. You know, if you're some little startup and you're announcing, you know, this thing, and you think you're going to be able to impose a media embargo, I would be careful with a strategy like that. I would tread carefully. Not saying you can't do it, but just think twice before, you know, charging again. Yes, you will follow our embargo. It's like, well, what are you going to do if I don't?
Very valuable, Ben. Thank you, Ben Parr. Your last word. We'll start with you.
Yeah. To note on the embargo side, that's not an easy thing for us, journalists, and investors, and you. We know how to do them, how they work, all that sorts of things, but most entrepreneurs don't. They're very, very difficult to actually execute properly. So learn from people who've actually done it before you go do one yourself, and make sure you have something worthy. Embargoes are usually for the things of, you know, second-time entrepreneurs who've sold their companies and people know them, for founders that have great name investors, or for teams that have like people who understand embargoes. Otherwise, get just those exclusives from top publications, and just go and crank out great products. And every time you crank out a great product, you can use that as an announcement with maybe a different publication, and then eventually it starts building up. But the only way to really, really learn this game is experience, and go talk with.
Great. Martin, the last word of advice for startups, in particular at the Web Summit and their media strategy.
Get to know the journalists you want to target beforehand, definitely. And I don't mean get to know them personally. I mean get to know what they look like. Get to know that they're on the kind of the press list to attend the Web Summit, and set aside some time to find them. Certainly, booking meetings in some cases would be definitely a good idea. I'm already my calendar is starting to fill up for the Web Summit already, and even then, that's because I held people back. I said, wait until mid-October before you start. Otherwise, it'd be starting to fill up in September. So yeah, I'd say actually book as many meetings in advance as you can, because otherwise actually making that face-to-face contact is going to be a lot harder. Although serendipity definitely has its place as well.
Ben Rooney, I know you're going to be personally protected by the Irish rugby captain, Jamie Heaslip, whilst you're walking around.
I'm going to hold tight 5.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, Ben Rooney will be interviewing Jamie Heaslip, the Irish rugby captain, who's also an incredible kind of geek and obsessed with wearables. So Ben, your kind of parting word of advice?
I mean, I think that's all. You know, I think that's very good stuff. I think the number one tip I would have is don't be afraid. I mean, just simply don't be afraid. Yeah, yes. You've got some very big titles that are going to be there. You know, I mean, let's be honest. The Wall Street Journal is, you know, it doesn't get a lot bigger than the Wall Street Journal. But that doesn't mean that, you know, that we're somehow unapproachable, and it doesn't mean that just because you're talking to a big media title and you're a very small startup, that doesn't mean they're not interested in you. I mean, after all, that is, you know, that's our job. It's my job to go and find these people and talk to them, and you know, and if you're doing something interesting, exciting, to give you the exposure. So my number one tip is the worst that's going to happen, frankly, is we're just going to say no, and that's as bad as it gets. Well, you know, that's as bad as it gets.
Fantastic, guys! Thank you so much for all of your advice. I've actually learned so much just by being on this Hangout, and I hope all of those listening and watching around the world have learned a lot as well. So thank you again so much for your time, to both Bens and Martin. See you both in Dublin.
See you in Dublin.
Bye.